Good morning, everyone, and happy holidays. If you are listening to this live, we are only a week away from Christmas. And if you're not listening to it live, I either hope that you have a happy holiday or that you had happy holidays. Tis the season. Feels like we are all things Christmas right now. So it's kind of on everybody's mind. But this morning, we are not going to be focusing on Christmas for a little bit. We are going to be taking another step in your journey here in the Academy for Excellence. We have a great topic for you today. This is actually one that we have added along the way as the program has evolved. So this is not a topic that everybody in the program has had. So you're kind of lucky in that you get kind of a new topic that we have decided is super important. It's a topic that focuses on emotional intelligence. So we are going to be talking all things emotional intelligence today, but of course you kind of know the drill before we get in too far. I love to take the opportunity to just talk over a few housekeeping items. So few things, a few reminders for you. It's always good for me to kind of throw out a reminder to make sure that you're meeting with your guides every month, right? That's a big part of the program, whether it's 30 minutes, 45 minutes, an hour, whatever it takes, right? Get those meetings on calendars if that's helpful. Sometimes I know for me that's super helpful if I just automatically schedule them, then I know that they're going to happen. Take the time to talk about the forum, the topic that you just had, what did you learn, go over the goals for that month, et cetera, et cetera. You know the drill. So just another reminder to be taking the time to do that. Again, be working on your project for the year. It's crazy how fast a month goes by. We all know that. And before you know it, May will be just around the corner. So every month, just take a little bit of time. Again, throw it on your calendar if that's helpful. Take a little bit of time to just continually be working on that annual project. Hopefully things are going well. If you have any issues at all, want to talk through something, don't hesitate to reach out to us. We'd love to help you out with that. And then just the last reminder for today is that there will be no webinar in January. So you get a little break, you get a little month off. Maybe what you could do is you could take that hour that you would have listened to a webinar and work on your project. So a little gift to you is a little bit of extra time in the month of January to not have a webinar and spend a little time on your projects if you choose to do so. So with that, those are all of my reminders for today. Let's dig into the reason that we're here. So like I said, today's topic is all about emotional intelligence. And we're going to start off with the quote that you see up on your screen here. It is a quote by David Caruso, and he's an author, the author of the book, The Emotionally Intelligent Leader, which is fitting for today. So the quote goes, emotional intelligence is not the opposite of intelligence. It is not the triumph of heart over head. It is the unique intersection of both. So this quote kind of emphasizes that EQ or EI, emotional intelligence, whatever you want to use. Some people use EI for emotional intelligence, some people use EQ. So this emphasizes that EI complements IQ rather than competing with it. A lot of times what you'll hear is that IQ is what gets you in the door, right? But it's emotional intelligence that determines how far you will go. And studies do show that emotional intelligence accounts for nearly 90% of what sets high performers apart in leadership roles. It is really, really important. And I think over the years, as we've been doing the Academy, we realized that we really need to put this into the program. It's a big part of, you growing and developing as a leader. So we wanted to make sure that we spend an adequate amount of time talking about this topic. I'm going to actually read from the book. It's called Emotional Intelligence 2.0. It's written kind of in the same format as like the Strengths Finder, if you're familiar with that. I know we talk about that off and on in the program as we're talking about, building your strengths and working into your strengths. So if you have not ever heard of this book, Emotional Intelligence 2.0, search it out, Google, Amazon, whatever. It really is just a quick read. You can do it a little EI, emotional intelligence, little quiz to kind of help you figure out where you're at in regards to emotional intelligence. But as we're talking about this, I wanted to just read something in here because I thought it was important, and it really kind of sets the tone for what we're going to be talking about today. It says, emotional intelligence is the something in each of us that is a bit intangible. It affects how we manage behavior, navigate social complexities, and make personal decisions that achieve positive results. There is no known connection between IQ and EQ, what we're talking about today. You simply can't predict EQ based on how smart someone is. Cognitive intelligence, or their IQ, is not flexible. Your IQ, short of a traumatic event such as a brain injury, is fixed from birth. You don't get smarter by learning new facts or information. Intelligence is your ability to learn, and it's the same at age 15 as it is at age 50. So I thought that was very interesting. It goes on to say that EQ, on the other hand, is a flexible skill that can be learned. While it is true that some people are naturally more emotionally intelligent than others, a high EQ can be developed even if you aren't born with it. So again, kind of talking about and kind of introducing what we're going to be spending a lot of time talking about today here, and wanted to just really kind of set the tone and really be able to differentiate, IQ from EI or EQ. So wanted to just talk briefly about that. So why does it matter, right? Why does it matter so much that we decided that, it's an important part of this program? Well, there's a lot of reasons, obviously, but one of the main reasons is that we know that banking is a relationship business, and emotional intelligence can and does impact nearly every interaction if you really sit back and think about it. And as leaders in this industry, it is so important that you understand this. So that's why we're going to be spending the next 55 minutes talking about this. On the screen here, it says why emotional intelligence matters, and it talks about trust, right? Well, I think you would all agree that banking is a high trust industry. There are high emotional demands that come along with what you guys do each and every day. When we're talking about leadership, right? Leaders influence so many things. They influence team culture. They influence the stress levels within your organization, the customer experience. So emotional intelligence matters in regards to leadership. It matters in regards to customer experience, right? Emotional intelligence strengthens service, the service that you provide, how you collaborate and work together in your bank, decision making, all of those things have a direct correlation to emotional intelligence. And then team culture. Emotional intelligence is so essential for things like coaching, when you're navigating change, how you handle those sorts of things. If you're trying to reduce errors, create efficiencies, all of those things, when you sit back and think about it, you're going to be able to see how emotional intelligence fits into each of those things, and that's why it matters. All right, so here is where we are going to take you today. We're going to start off, of course, just kind of giving you just a little bit of an introduction and, what is emotional intelligence? We're going to kind of dissect it a little bit, dig into it before we really get into some of these other things like the 4 components of emotional intelligence. We're going to talk about how there's really 4 different pieces to understanding emotional intelligence. We're going to spend a little bit of time talking about each of those. Then we're going to get into a few bank-specific emotional intelligence scenarios, kind of be able to put you into some of these scenarios, probably scenarios that you've been put in before, but we're going to kind of carve out what we've learned as it relates to emotional intelligence and how we can maybe navigate these situations maybe a little bit differently the next time they happen. So we're going to go through a couple different scenarios. And then we're going to give you a few tools that you can use to really help you work on, develop, and hopefully wherever you're at, and everybody's probably at a little bit different place when it comes to their emotional intelligence, but we're going to give you some tools to really help you start to reflect, look in the mirror, maybe try to work on some things that maybe need a little bit of work. So we're going to give you some tools, and then of course we're going to end the day today with some key questions. And these are some good questions that you of course can sit down with your guide and talk about and chat about after the webinar. So that's where we're headed today. All right, so let's dig in. What is emotional intelligence? Well, you'll see there's kind of an equation on the screen here. It says emotional intelligence equals your emotions plus awareness plus action. And we know that in banking, where trust in relationships drive success, emotional intelligence is the skill that really does separate good leaders from great leaders. So let's break this down here. Let's break this equation down just a little bit. Let's talk a little bit about emotions. We all know what emotions are, right? Emotions, it's when we are recognizing that our emotions are data. They're not distractions. So we need to start thinking about our emotions like data. How we respond to different things is like data that we can start to kind of analyze and evaluate. And these emotions tell us what matters most in a situation. So when we're thinking about emotional intelligence, the first part of that equation is understanding and recognizing how we're feeling in a situation, what our emotions are. And then the second piece of that is awareness, and that's developing self-awareness. What are our triggers when it comes to those emotions? What are our strengths maybe when it comes to our emotions? And then social awareness, kind of reading the room, right? So it's our self-awareness, and it's also our social awareness is the second part of that equation. And then it's action, turning that awareness into intentional behavior, choosing the responses that are going to do things like build trust, enhance collaboration, build resilience. So when you think about this, it's your emotions, it's understanding your emotions, both for yourself and how it affects others, the social part of that, and then what are we doing with it? All right. There was a quote or a sentence in the book that I had read from earlier that says, emotional intelligence is the single biggest predictor of performance in the workplace and the strongest driver of leadership and personal excellence. And when I read that, I was like, man, that's a pretty bold statement. So as we're talking about emotional intelligence today, I want you to really kind of dial in. I want you to dial into yourself, because think about this statement. It's the single biggest predictor of performance in the workplace and the strongest driver of leadership and personal excellence. So let's say that's true, right? I mean, and we know not everything that's written and published is true, but even if that's close to being true, what that says to me is that emotional intelligence matters, okay? So let's continue on with this emotional intelligence, right? Think of a time when a leader's reaction to something, either positive or negative, changed the outcome of a situation. What role did emotions, awareness, and action play? And if you're like me, I always feel like those negative reactions are the ones that kind of stick in my head, right? Maybe the time where somebody, a leader, blew up, or got upset, got emotional, was very frustrated in a situation. And how did that affect what happened? What role did those emotions, that awareness, and the action play in that situation? So, as we continue to talk about this, we know that emotional intelligence is the ability to recognize, understand, and manage emotions in yourself and others. Now, we can't control others, but what we're saying here is that how you handle those, right, is going to affect others. We know that emotional intelligence predicts leadership success more than IQ and technical skills alone. We already talked about that at the very beginning. And again, we want to mention that emotional intelligence, it's a skill. It's not a personality trait. And one of the most important pieces that you understand is that it can be developed. All right. Leaders can absolutely practice and grow their emotional intelligence through just practicing it, for one, through feedback, through intentional actions, through reflection, like what just happened there? How did I handle that? How did others respond to that? Did I like what happened in that situation? So it can absolutely be developed and practiced and grown. So let's talk for just a second about what emotional intelligence is not, okay? What it's not is that it's not being soft or avoiding conflict. I think sometimes when we throw out the word emotional intelligence, or when you think about it, or when people are talking about it in conversation, it's always kind of thought of as kind of the touchy-feely stuff or the warm fuzzy stuff, you know. But what I want you to know is that it's not being soft or avoiding conflict. It's not suppressing your emotions. It's not simply being friendly or agreeable. It's so much more than that. And it's certainly not about reading minds. It's not about being nice all the time. Um, it does not mean avoiding tough conversations or sugarcoating reality. And we're going to talk about that as we talk about like the different components. So we're not talking about, we're just going to sugarcoat everything and we're going to make sure everything just kind of gets glossed over and that's emotional intelligence. It certainly is not. True emotional intelligence involves honesty, it involves accountability, so much honesty, so much accountability, and it's delivered with respect and empathy. And we're going to talk about all those pieces, and you're really going to see that and understand that, I think, by the time we're done talking about this at the end of the day here. It's not about manipulation. I do think that sometimes people confuse emotional intelligence with using emotions to kind of control or influence others, maybe manipulation. But it truly is not. It's truly understanding, reading the room, reading yourself, and then the correct actions or the better actions um, to maybe make the situation uh, come out better, work out better. It's those sorts of things. So we just wanted to spend a little bit of time making sure that you understand what emotional intelligence is not. All right, so let's dig into this. Let's dig into what we mentioned as the 4 components of emotional intelligence. But before we do that quickly, I want to just kind of set the stage for you by getting you thinking about where emotional intelligence shows up in banking. Lots of places, and we already talked about that, but I'm just going to throw out a few so you can maybe kind of put yourself into these shoes as we're talking about this today. Think about when you're working with customers in your bank, whether it's you're working with a customer and they're excited about buying a new home, right? You're sitting down with them, talking through all the paperwork and all the things associated with buying this home. Lots of emotions are going on there, right? Maybe you're talking to a customer and they have a lot of anxiety about debt. Maybe they've gotten themselves into a really scary place with some debt type situations, and you are working with them, and you know that emotions are running high in lots of different ways. Maybe you're working with a customer who's super frustrated with something that's gone on in the bank, a process, a fee, the way that the service that they think they either got or didn't get. Um, Leaders need to emphasize, they need to listen, and they need to respond. And all of these things are emotional intelligence. So that's customer. Let's think about just working with your internal team, right? Maybe you're managing your team under a pressure situation. Something's going on and it's kind of a high pressure situation. We've got to figure this out. We've got a really big customer that we're working with that's kind of demanding a lot from us. Maybe you are in a situation where you have to motivate your employees. Maybe you just feel like, people aren't, your team's not very motivated. Maybe you've lost some good team members in the past, and you really just kind of have to figure out, how do I get my team motivated? Maybe you're handling conflict in the bank between employees or some sort of conflict situation. This is where emotional intelligence is so important, right? So again, we could probably come up with a huge laundry list of all the different places where emotional intelligence shows up in your world in banking. So let's talk through the four components, and I think it's going to help you just kind of see and understand in these situations where exactly you're going to start seeing emotional intelligence all over the place. So here are the four components of emotional intelligence. Um, and emotional intelligence is really built on these four, and they're all interconnected skills. And together they form the foundation of what I would say is effective leadership. And if you understand each of these parts, you will develop a really strong foundation of emotional intelligence. And like we said, remember, it's a skill. It can be developed. So the first two that we're going to talk about, you'll see up on the screen here, self-awareness and self-management. Those are more about you. The bottom two, social awareness and relationship management, are more about how you are with other people. So the first two focus pretty strictly on you, kind of looking ourselves in the mirror, right? And then the bottom two are more about how we are with other people. And we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about each of these four components. So let's go. Let's dig into this. So the first one is self-awareness. This is the starting point for all other emotional intelligence skills. So this is where we have to start, right? And it really is kind of, if you ask me, a process. It has to start here, I feel like, and you're going to see why as we move through all of these four components. And we know what self-awareness is, right? Self-awareness is the ability to recognize and understand your own emotions, thoughts, and behaviors, and how they then affect others. Without self-awareness, you can't manage your emotions. It's hard to empathize. It's hard to build strong relationships if we are not self-aware. We need to know ourselves, and we need to lead ourselves. So often when we think about leading people, we're thinking about leading others, right? But self-awareness really, and I love the way that you kind of think about this, self-awareness is really knowing yourself and leading yourself. So think of a recent stressful moment maybe that you had in your life. What emotion did you feel? Then maybe how did you behave? And how might others have perceived you, right? So let's maybe take this even into our personal lives. And a stressful moment. Maybe you had a super stressful moment at home. Something happened. It's Christmas time, right? It's very possible and very probable that we've all had very stressful moments recently. Unfortunately, sometimes, I don't know if you're parents, I feel like Christmas is kind of this love-hate kind of relationship, at least at our house. Love it, but there's also things about it that I hate because it does bring on a lot of stress. So what emotion did you feel? Were you angry? Were you super frustrated? And then how did you behave? Maybe that caused some yelling or some lashing out, or maybe it even caused you to just go into another room and avoid everybody and everything. And then how did that affect how others perceived you, right? Like, oh, like in my situation, right? Oh, mom's mad. Like, wow, let's stay away. What happened? How did others perceive you? And so, you know what? We're human, and I get it. These things are going to happen. But I think what happens then is when we are able to self-reflect, it allows us to understand why we reacted the way we did. Did I like the way I reacted? You know what? There's plenty of times where I have let my emotions, they happened and I wasn't very happy about it. Do you wish there were things you would have done differently? Absolutely. There's been times, right, that we wished we would have done things differently. And this is what we're talking about when we're starting to be self-aware. Being honest with ourselves is so crucial to being truly self-aware. And you know what? We're not always going to get it right. We're going to have those emotions, and sometimes those emotions are going to get the best of us, and we're going to do things that we regret. But if we can become a little bit more self-aware and minimize those times where those emotions got the best of us, it led to a behavior or an action and a perception that we really were kind of upset that it ended that way. If we can lessen those, that's what we're talking about here, right? So it's recognizing emotions in real time. It's knowing our triggers, right? Maybe our triggers are, it's late in the day, I haven't eaten all day. Maybe our triggers are, I don't know, all sorts of things. I think we all know what our triggers might be. And it's understanding how your behavior then impacts others. And that's why we say that this is the foundation for all other emotional intelligence skills. I'm going to give you just an example here. So there is a person who, and I can kind of be this way too. So I'm not like calling this person out, but we all probably know the people where if you're sitting at a ball game, and I've had lots of kids in lots of like sports type situations who get extremely competitive and emotional in a game type situation. Doesn't matter if it's football, basketball, baseball, whatever the situation might be. So again, we're kind of relating this to a personal situation, right? And so we think about this and think about, okay, what is going back here? Going back to the emotions that this person is feeling. You can tell that they're super competitive, they're super passionate about what's going on. Maybe they're, yelling at a referee or whatever the situation. So then the behavior is that yelling and that screaming and that standing up and that, yelling in the situation. And then how might others perceive you? I know thinking about this person is it makes it hard to maybe want to sit next to that person, right? It's like, they're a great person, but they just get super competitive and super loud and super boisterous and almost sometimes super inappropriate, right, in that situation. And so that emotion, that action, that perception, those are the sorts of things that we're talking about. And I can get competitive too. And I know I have even had times where I've had to say, okay, you know what, after that happens, maybe I get super emotional. I'm a lot of times I'm like, all right, that, Julie, you maybe should have backed off a little bit. You maybe should have just tapped that down a little bit. So that's me trying to be self-aware, and that's kind of what we're talking about here. So why does it matter? It matters for so many reasons. You know, being self-aware allows you to avoid those reactive choices that honestly sometimes can end up harming relationships, right? We get it. You know, sometimes when we are not self aware and maybe our frustration, our anger, whatever it might be, comes out, and we have those reactive choices, that can cause some damage to relationships. And that might be an internal relationship, it could even be a customer relationship, right? Um, Things like being self-aware, it helps us maintain our authenticity and our integrity. So sometimes, and a lot of times, and definitely in banking, you know, that reputation, it matters, right? We want our customers to think and that they can come to us and we're going to be calm, cool, collected, and we're going to help them in their situation. So a couple just kind of hypothetical questions for you are, you know, how often do you think about and kind of think about being self-aware in a situation? I How often do you maybe self-reflect after something has happened? And are there situations where you've self-reflected and you're like, I need to change the way that I maybe react to those types of situations? And have you found yourself maybe making some progress, maybe some baby steps when it comes to that? Self-awareness really is like checking your financial statements, right? You can't manage what you don't measure. So it's important that we step back and we self-reflect. So the second part of that, we're still talking about us, right? Is self-management. Self-management is where emotional intelligence becomes actionable. This is the pause, the breath, the choosing what we're going to do next. Okay. So we're self aware, and now we're going to work on self management. Pausing is creating that space between the stimulus, what's going on, and how we respond. It's that pause that prevents knee jerk reactions. Okay. I know I don't pause near enough, right? I hate that awkward silence, and I'm always like, oh, I've got to have a response, I've got to have a whatever. But I do think that pausing can be so powerful. It's to breathe, it's using a physical reset to calm our nervous system. Again, it's so amazing what just taking a breath can do. Even just a few seconds can give you enough time to think and maybe pivot or shift your perspective before the action. And then choosing. It's making a conscious decision aligned with your values and the desired outcome. What response is going to build trust? What response is going to solve the problem? What response is going to strengthen the relationship? Whatever, right? Whatever you want that outcome to be. I like this little, it's kind of a cute way to think of it. It's name it to tame it, right? Name that conscious decision in order that you want the outcome to look like in order to tame your knee jerk reactions. So always think about your self management is pausing, breathing, and choosing. So to talk about this just a little bit more, right? We said choosing your response instead of reacting. It's handling pressure with composure, taking that deep breath and just thinking about, okay, before I say something I shouldn't, right? Before I come off really angry and annoyed, which is then going to have this trickle down effect, all of those things. It's aligning our actions with our values. And it's understanding that emotional control is equal to emotional suppression. So in banking leadership, you know, being able to self-manage, it really can help to ensure that you're handling situations on a more consistent basis that you're handling them with a level of professionalism, and that you are showing others that you can be trustworthy under pressure. So taking that second to think about self-management, because we know that working in a bank and working with customers, it often brings things like financial stress. You're working with people who are often under a lot of financial stress, and leaders who can manage themselves will project calm and confidence, especially coming across to customers who maybe themselves are not feeling calm and confidence. You projecting calm and confidence is going to project onto them. And in moments of uncertainty, self-management is going to prevent panic-driven decisions, right? Where there's uncertainty, we don't know what's happening, we don't know what to do, we don't know what's going to happen in the future. It allows us, sorry, I couldn't think of the word, allows us to not have those panic-driven decisions. And leaders who consistently demonstrate composure, they're the ones that become role models and trusted advisors in their bank and in their communities. We touched on this just briefly, but I think we all kind of understand what we're saying when it says your mood shapes the room. I don't know how many of you have heard of the phrase emotional contagion, and I think I'm pronouncing that right, CONTAGION. But what it is, it's the kind of a phenomenon where people catch emotions from those around them, often unconsciously or subconsciously this happens, right? It just kind of happens. So it's kind of like how a smile or a sigh can kind of spread through a room. I know we've all experienced that before. It's we catch the emotions of what's going on. You wake up in the morning and your spouse is just in a bad mood, right? Isn't it kind of easy to just kind of catch that? It kind of is contagious, and you're like, geez, I didn't wake up in a bad mood, but my spouse is in a bad mood. Now I feel like I'm in a bad mood, right? Or the opposite, wake up and it's a great day, and then I kind of try to project that onto my family, my spouse, and my kids, and it just kind of has that ripple effect. So leaders' emotions spread quickly. Your mood becomes the team's mood. Whether that's positive or negative emotions, they both can be contagious. And we want to make sure that we're modeling the climate that we want in our organization. I like this kind of analogy. It says that leaders are emotion thermostats, not thermometers. Thermostats merely reflect the environment, right? But thermometers set the emotional climate. So it's kind of a good way to think about that. All right, let's move on to the third factor, and we're going to talk about social awareness. This is kind of, and it says empathy, right? This is where we see, we hear, and we understand. So the first two were talking about us. The second two now are starting to talk about with others. So social awareness is the bridge between managing yourself and connecting meaningfully with others. It's the ability to recognize and understand the emotions, needs, and concerns of others. So let's talk a little bit about empathy, right? Empathy is really the heart of social awareness. It's not just noticing, but it's really connecting with what others are experiencing. We all know what empathy is, and we all have varying levels of empathy within us, right? So let's talk about C. This is where we start to notice verbal cues, right? Something's happening, there have been emotions, and we are then starting to see things like verbal cues, body language, facial expressions, energy levels. Maybe we can think about this like maybe we're starting to see like a customer's anxious posture, or they're clicking their pen on the table, and we can see that maybe they're anxious. So we're starting to see things, and then we hear, and this is where we listen actively, and we listen really beyond words. We pay attention to things like their tone, the pace, what's not being said, right? So we're seeing some of these verbal cues, we're hearing, we're listening, and then we're understanding. And this is where we interpret what's happening, right? We interpret their emotions, we interpret their perspectives. We start to understand, okay, now I get what's causing the frustration. So see, hear, and then understand. So let's think about some ways where empathy and banking are apparent. You know, customers might be feeling vulnerable, anxious, maybe they're even embarrassed. Maybe you have employees that are overwhelmed or maybe stressed. It's recognizing those emotions and then reducing the escalation. So understanding the emotions and then doing what you can to reduce the escalation of them. And I think we all know that empathy is one of those skills that really does build loyalty and trust. You can probably think of somebody who just, has a very high level of empathy. And when you are needing somebody, maybe an ear, somebody to talk to, you see what a truly empathetic person can do to kind of help the situation. So again, it's understanding others' emotions. It's reading those verbal and nonverbal cues. It's seeing situations from their perspective. And honestly, empathy is a big key to customer service excellence. All right, so we talked about things like active listening, maintaining eye contact, nodding when they're talking. You could even do things like paraphrasing. You can ask open-ended questions, encourage deeper sharing. Uh, Try to suspend your judgment, right? As you're trying to be socially aware, don't right away throw your judgment or your ideas or your thoughts. Focus on understanding before evaluating or advising. And then perspective taking. Imagine the situation from the other person's viewpoint. What if you were sitting in the chair on the other side of the desk? And it's doing these things that are going to start leading to deeper connections. All right, we've made it to the fourth part of the four pieces that make up emotional intelligence. And this one is relationship management. And this is leading through connection. All right. So as we said, self-awareness is kind of where it all starts. Relationship management is really kind of the capstone, right? It's what ties all of the other three components together. And relationship management is what we're talking about here. It's the ability to then inspire, influence, and develop others while managing conflict effectively. It's being able to connect, right? It's leading through connection. It's influence with integrity. It's clear communication. It's mentorship and coaching. It's conflict navigation. It's all of those things is what we're talking about when we're talking about relationship management. So again, when we were talking about tying all of this together, what makes this really the ability to really tie everything that we've talked about? It's talking about active listening. It's showing empathy in our actions. It's when we're applying the see, hear, understand when we're resolving conflict. It's giving constructive feedback, having regular check-ins, building rapport with your team, building rapport with your customers. It's things like resolving conflict, building trust and accountability. It's leading through change. Things like celebrating wins, right? Recognizing achievements, those sorts of things. It's all of these things talk about relationship, right? And relationships are like investments. The more you nurture them, the greater the return. We know that, we get that, right? We talk about that, whether it's with coworkers, whether it's with our personal friends, whatever it is, right? We have to nurture those relationships. And the more we do, the greater the return. It's about creating lasting impact through what I would say is always needs to be authentic connection. All right, so we've made it through the 4 pieces. Definitely spent the most amount of time probably talking about self-awareness and self-management, because in my opinion, that is where it all starts with us, right? We can control us. And then how does what we do and how we react and what we say and our emotions and our behaviors affect others and the outcomes that we want to have? All right, so let's move on. We've got a good 15 minutes left. We're going to roll through a few bank-specific emotional intelligence scenarios next, using those 4 components to kind of set the stage for what we're talking about here. So here's our first scenario. We have an employee who snaps at a customer. What do? You hear it, you've overheard it, you've seen it. You are the leader seeing an employee of yours snap at a customer. And so self-awareness is the first step, right? As the leader, first check your emotional state. Where are you at? What have you been having a bad day, right? And then you see this happen. What if you just got off a phone call that has made you really stressed? Check your emotional state first. Don't let your emotional state rule how this situation is going to be handled. Recognize your feelings so that they don't spill over and escalate the moment. All right. So we are going to be self-aware. We're going to know ourselves and we're going to lead ourselves. Then we're going to self-manage, right? This is where we pause. Don't react immediately in front of the customer. Breathe, center yourself, project calm authority, right? And then we're going to choose. We're going to respond in a way that de-escalates the situation and preserves trust. Preserves trust with our employee, but also preserves trust, hopefully, with our customer. So, for example, we're maybe going to step into the situation if we feel like we need to with a composed tone. We're going to see if we can maybe redirect the conversation, and we're going to reassure the customer that their concern is going to be addressed, right? So there's a way that we can do this with calmness and with composure. All right, so those are self-awareness and self-management. Then the social awareness piece, right? The next part of it. We're going to see, right? Because we said see, hear, and choose. We're going to see, we're going to notice the customer's emotional state. Are they upset? Are they offended? What are we noticing? We're going to hear, we're going to listen to their concern without interruption, right? What's going on? What's the situation? We're going to hear, and then we're going to understand and we're going to validate their feelings. Things like, I see this interaction was upsetting. I want to make it right. I understand where you're coming from. What can we do? You know, those sorts of things. And then the relationship management piece. There's a couple pieces of this, right? There's the relationship management with the customer. We need to make sure that if any damage has been done, that we repair the relationship by apologizing, offering a next step. And again, every situation is different, right? There's varying degrees of what this might look like, but we're going to try to do what we can to make sure that the relationship has not been damaged. In this situation, we want to make sure it's repaired. We're going to offer a next step. We're going to show that the bank values respect and professionalism, and we're going to hopefully have the customer walking away feeling okay at the end. And then we have some relationship management stuff to deal with the employee, right? What we're going to try to do is we're going to probably address the behavior privately. Certainly not in front of the customer, not in front of their peers, other employees, and say something like, I noticed you were frustrated. Let's talk about this. What triggered that? Tell me exactly what happened. How can we maybe handle it a little bit differently next time? Because I would say in most situations, it's probably not okay, right? If your employee is snapping or yelling or getting angry at a customer. Now I know it happens, right? But in most situations, we want to try to figure out how we can handle this differently next time. So we've worked through all the different components of emotional intelligence there, right? Self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship management. Let's go on to our next one. A denied loan. All right. Emotions, there's emotions on both sides of the table because there has been a denied loan. So let's talk about this. Self-awareness. The leader or the employee, right? We want to recognize our own emotions. Maybe we're feeling some discomfort because we have to tell the customer what happened that's been denied. Maybe there's some guilt or defensiveness about delivering the bad news. Ugh, like I don't want to have to do this. And from the customer, understanding that financial stress often amplifies emotions like frustration, fear, or disappointment. So we're self-aware, we understand what might be coming our way, right? When we communicate this to the customer. And then our self-management, we're going to pause. We're not going to rush through the conversation of this denial. We know it's probably going to be a little bit uncomfortable and we're going to be okay with that. We're going to take a moment to center ourselves. We're going to breathe, maybe regulate our tone and our body language to project to our customer the calmness and empathy that we want to portray. We're going to choose, and that choosing is that we're going to deliver the message with professionalism, compassion, focusing on clarity and respect, right? Because again, putting ourselves in their shoes. I understand this is disappointing. Let's walk through the reasons together, maybe why the loan was denied. Maybe let's explore some other opportunities or some other alternatives. So that's the self-management piece. Social awareness. We're going to see, which means we're going to notice the customer's nonverbal cues. Is there tension? Is there frustration? Is there sadness? Right? Then we're going to hear, we're going to listen actively to their concerns or fears about what this denial means for them. We're going to understand and validate their emotions. I understand this feels discouraging, right? And then we're going to make sure and work on that relationship management. We're going to maybe offer some constructive next steps, things that can maintain their dignity and their respect, and those sorts of things. So what I wanted to do, I wanted to just work through a few scenarios so that you could kind of get the feel for what we're talking about here and how we can start working on our emotional intelligence in these types of situations. All right. So what are some tools, some everyday tools that you can use? Pre-conversation reset. What are we talking about here? This is where we're going to start the conversation from a place of balance, right? Kind of like we talked about in those scenarios. Before the conversation happens, we're going to do a little bit of a reset. We're going to check ourselves. We're going to think about self-managing ourselves. We're going to think about how what we say and do is going to be perceived. And then how are we going to manage that relationship? We might use some power questions, right? These questions can kind of help us shift from, reaction to having a thoughtful response. Things like, what's most important to me right now? What's most important to you right now? Here's what I'm hearing. Did I get that right? And here's what we can do. So maybe thinking through those questions in any given scenario might help you with kind of that emotional intelligence piece of handling the conversation. We're going to slow the moment down before responding. We talked about this, right? We might use silence. We might use slower speech. We might use intentional pauses, those sorts of things. Make sure you have those in your toolbox and you use them when you need to. And then we're going to document and reflect after tough interactions. It's always good to jot down what happened, how you felt, and what you might do differently next time. I think that can be very useful and a very powerful tool. We can do some personal self-assessments, right? Let's go through each of the 4 things that we talked about earlier: self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, and relationship management. Rate yourself on a scale of 5, right? Self-awareness, how well do I recognize my emotions? What are my triggers? What are my blind spots? Self-management, how consistently do I pause? Do I regulate my emotions? Do I choose constructive responses under stress? rate yourself on each of those 4 different areas, and maybe then spend some time working on the one where you maybe find yourself rating the lowest. Identify your strongest area, identify one area that you need development. So those are some tools that you can use when talking about reflecting on your own emotional intelligence. We're going to talk just a little bit here before we get to the end and the questions. So these are just some general thoughts and observations about people with high levels of emotional intelligence. They tend to make better decisions. They tend to keep cool under pressure. They resolve conflict. They have greater empathy, and they listen, reflect, and respond to constructive criticism. All right. Because if you think about it, all the things that we talked about today, it makes sense, right? If there's people who are really good at those things, they're really good at self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, and I can't think of it now. All of a sudden I'm trying to blank. You know what it is, right? Relationship management. I can think of the word relationship. It makes sense, right? That they make better decisions, that they keep cool under pressure, that all of these things work for them. So on the flip side of the coin, right, let's talk about people with lower emotional intelligence. Perhaps people with lower intelligence seem to play the role of victim, right, or avoid taking responsibility for errors. They don't like to be self-aware. They don't like to self-reflect on ways they could be possibly, doing things differently. They may have passive or aggressive communication styles. They refuse to work as a team, and they're overly critical of others or dismiss others' opinions. A lot of times, the people with lower emotional intelligence, you'll find that they can often spread anxiety or negativity with other people. They may react impulsively, they tend to lash out, they struggle to control their frustrations, they kind of dismiss other people's feelings. So identify and look for those things, right? And see where you tend to notice them. And then, all right, so again, we're talking about how can you apply your emotional intelligence as a leader. Here are some things that you can do to kind of put all of the things that we've talked about into play. So we're going to empathize before we analyze, right? We're going to always think about how do we empathize, put ourselves in someone else's shoes before we analyze. We're going to focus on actual needs, right? We're going to ask some clarifying questions like, what would help you feel more supported right now? Things like that to help focus on what the other person actually needs. We're going to take breaks to recharge. We know that leaders set the tone, and that breaks are going to improve decision making and reduce emotional reactivity. Number 4, we're going to hire for emotional intelligence. So that's an interesting one, right? We're going to hire for emotional intelligence. We know that technical skills can be taught, but emotional intelligence, it's harder to instill. So if we can look for candidates that demonstrate self-awareness, adaptability, empathy in our interviews, wouldn't that be some things that are nice to find in your next hire? And then number 5, we're going to practice self-regulation. And self-regulation is what builds credibility. People trust leaders who can remain calm under pressure. And that's what we're talking about. So those are some ways that you can apply your emotional intelligence as a leader. So what I'm going to throw out to you is a little bit of an action plan. What's one strength that you feel like you have as it relates to the components that we talked about today? And what's one skill that you can improve upon? And then think about what's one action that you can work on in the next couple of weeks to really start to work on your emotional intelligence. Because remember that emotional intelligence isn't just theory. It's a skill set that grows with practice, and it grows with small, consistent actions over time, creating lasting change. All right? It's not about being perfect, but it's about being intentional. And if you can identify one strength, one skill to improve, and one action item to do over the next couple weeks, you are going to plant seeds for growth, right? We know that small, consistent steps, they kind of compound into bigger changes. And as leaders, when we choose to do things like empathize, regulate our emotions, focus on the real needs, we don't just improve ourselves, we improve everybody around us. So before we get to our questions, and as you get ready to lead today, I encourage you to carry this forward. Be the leader who listens before speaking, who pauses before reacting, and who inspires by the examples that you set. All right, commit to these small actions, and I think that you will see a big difference. So let's roll through these questions here at the very end. I know our time is coming to a close. These are great questions again to talk about with your guide. Question number 1, what does emotionally intelligent leadership look like in your bank setting? What does that look like? And list some behaviors that make it visible day to day. What are those actions and those behaviors that make it visible in the day-to-day interactions? Question number 2, how can leaders balance empathy with accountability, right? Empathy with accountability, especially when performance issues or errors occur. That's a great question, right? We're saying we want to be empathetic, but when we have to hold people accountable and in situations and errors and performance issues are occurring, how can we do that? And then the last one, how does a leader's emotional tone affect team culture over time? So some good questions. We have made it to the end. Thank you so much for spending an hour with me today. I really appreciate it. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. I hope, I always think it's like things that make you go, huh, right? I don't think we often spend enough time thinking about this. And so I think that this is a good way to put things into perspective and allow you to kind of sit back, take notice, take inventory on maybe some things that you need to do to maybe make some little course corrections, some little self-improvements. All right, and with that, I'm gonna let you go. Again, like I said at the beginning, I hope you each have a wonderful Christmas and New Year's holiday. We'll be back together again in February, so take care and have a great day and a great rest of your week. Goodbye.